transition to objective 4 with Natalie.
All right. So for this section, we're just going to talk a little bit about the people, right? The consumers that are the end point in our process. And our consumer preference team is made up of 3 folks from University of Tennessee, Marker coming in from Texas A&M, and then we collaborate with some North Carolina folks as well. So our big picture, of course, we're working off of the hypothesis that consumers, once they have the requisite knowledge, would be willing to pay for practices that support the benefit of the people behind those plants. So that's the idea of this image. We want to really uncover the people that are important in the productivity of this operation behind the plants. So we kind of have 3 main parts of our consumer preferences plan. We want to determine consumer knowledge about the production process and how automation and technology would come into that. And we want to assess their willingness to pay and how we might increase that willingness to pay through marketing and educational materials that increase their knowledge and therefore their valuation of the crops that you produce using automation technologies. So we have 3 points of our main objective. 4.1, which is kind of baseline surveys for perception and valuation. Then once we have that baseline requisite information, we want to build on that with in-person eye tracking, so more kind of biometric types of assessments. And then, of course, the extension piece comes into that. We want to support the development of tailored messaging and educational materials for those audience segments. And so as really is the whole emphasis of this project, we want to produce a lot of outreach materials. But one of the unique elements of this, and you heard from Margarita from the grower side and from the employee side, we really want to touch certainly growers with this type of information, what can help you reach them, but we also want to go directly to consumers with this information. So I'm going to show just a little bit kind of baseline data from our first survey that was conducted last summer, tell you a little bit about where we are and what we're doing right now this summer. And our first objective is really to just assess baseline awareness and knowledge. And so we all first survey, as we'll show you some data coming up here, is that in many ways consumers don't know enough about the production processes that are in place in your operations to be all that great at answering willingness to pay questions. So last summer we did 22 and 1,000 person nationwide, and we're targeting on an audience segment who are either the primary or the co-plant interests, decision makers in their family, and 100% of them bought plants in the last year. So those are kind of our screening questions for this nationwide survey that we used a Qualtrics panel for. So you have this in your handout. So, I mean, I don't want to belabor these graphs, but I do just want to kind of give you the big picture of what consumers know about oil production, which is not a ton, right? So one of the kind of baseline questions, we asked them scale of 0, not at all, to 4, a whole. How much automation is really being done in the production of these common plants? Try to mix it up, right? There are some agronomic crops, so there's soybeans, some food crops, tomatoes, apples, and then there are more crops, both from floriculture and from the nursery side. And what we see is, just kind of a mixture of in the middle types of answers. Number 5 on this was found from this survey. A lot of these crops, it was kind of in the middle. There tended to be slightly, increases or trends of more perception of automation or technology use in the food crops. But 28%, the highest percentage in the surveys answered, I don't know, for petunias and for hydrangeas, right? So our primary, kind of our primary floriculture, from our consumers very much think the fact that they don't know how these crops are being produced. There were a couple of other more detailed questions that follow very much along these lines. We ask more specifically about kind of the arena of production. And then, as far as automation or mechanization, how much do this 100% plant purchaser audience think that automation or mechanization is used in a nursery? Well, not too many of them thought not. Interestingly enough, 6.5% of this audience thought that no mechanization was used in soybean production. I can't even imagine what a 100% manual soybean operation would look like. But so they were kind of hitting right here in this moderate amount. And you look at it like, well, maybe they have some idea what's going on. But we asked them the very next question, which was this same question in a greenhouse. And you notice almost exactly the same question, right? So we have a lot of people who are kind of hitting in the middle of these, not demonstrating, a very detailed knowledge of what's going on. The last couple of slides that are in here these are the more typical types of questions that plant buyers get in surveys, right? So these are about the factors that are important for plant purchase, right? Quality, appearance, price, typically being at the top of those lists. And then the next question also looked at kind of some attributes that are about the plants, but also about the producer, right? What we found is that for the most part, consumers were the most interested in attributes of plants that had to do with them, not surprisingly, right? Disease resistance, drought resistance. We're okay on some of those sustainability factors, but some of these, origin as far as where the plants were produced, the types of retailer that they were purchasing from were a little bit lower on those scales. So they care about the things that impact them, and they probably don't know very much about the way that these crops are being produced. There was a final question that is, in fact, positive information, and it is about willingness to pay for the employee, right, for the employee benefits. And so we just asked them, would you be willing to pay price premiums, not the price premiums for plants that were produced that had a production system that was important for physical well-being for the employee, mental well-being, or economic well-being? And what you found is that there was a pretty decent chunk of yeses. There was a pretty good chunk of maybes, right? That's our persuadable audience. And then we had right around 8 to 10% of the no, probably not willing to pay for that. So we have a large on-board or persuadable audience in this area of employee benefit. But we have answers about how plants are being produced or the level of automation use that they probably don't really know much detail beyond what types of practices might be involved that could benefit the employees in any of these. So those are kind of the take home. I think I've in some ways already said some of the themes that are on that next slide. But consumer knowledge about parent production is low. There seems to be little differentiation between the types of plants, whether they're grown under cover or whether they're grown outdoors. But the aspect of employee well-being is a positive aspect. Consumers are considering themselves willing to pay for that. We just need to be able to build on that and show them how it is that what they're doing in the marketplace can truly achieve those beneficial employee objectives. So that brings us to the second survey, which is out with the people right now. And so knowing that there was not a deep level of knowledge on these topics, we asked these questions in a way that provided more information to the participant and also built on some of these themes. So, ask them, what percentage of production cost do they think is really related to the labor, the people behind those operations? The acceptability of the use of automation in very specific tasks, right? So a lot of the questions that we asked in the previous survey were broader, right? They were lumping a lot of these tasks. So we were more specific about irrigation, about weed control, about potting, about moving, about inventory management. And we started to ask some questions that delved into what might be some psychological or other barriers to their assessment of technology in these areas. Do they think that it would be negative for employees? Do they think that it would impact quality in a positive or a negative way? So we're getting at a lot of the more central aspects, and we're doing that through some baseline questions as well as a discrete choice experiment. For those of us who are not economists, which is me, this is a scenario type of question. And it is the type of question where they're getting specific scenarios that have some pieces of detail, right? So they'll have scenarios that are at different price levels. And we built these questions to have 4 different levels of automation so that they're hearing clearly what it is that we're talking about in these production practices. So none additional practices being used, just the use of, timed irrigation, the use of potting machines, or the use of moving plants around using technology. So we're being specific about the types of tasks, and there's also some environmental aspects to these questions. So with that information and this more detailed analysis into the way that consumers think about automation, I did want to mention some of those questions in the survey that's out right now directly relate to some of the things that we talked about last year when we were here, which is that do consumers think that if we're using automation, the plants should then automatically be cheaper, right? So we want to get at what some of those honestly scary perceptions might be from the consumer so that we know what might be those targeted educational elements that we would need to look at. So following the data coming in on the work that is out right now, our eye tracking team in Texas, Tennessee, and North Carolina are going to be planning, late 26, early 2027 eye tracking. And then we're also going to be working on more educational materials. So, I come from an extension background. We also have one of our education colleagues on this project who really works on audience segment and tailoring those messages. So we're excited to get into some of these types of products, certainly for consumers, but we also want to begin to pitch this information and deliver it to our grower audiences as well. So those are the things that we're going to be doing over, this next remainder of 2026 and 2020 till we visit next fall. And we're excited to start to put together some of this consumer survey information in some of our grower trainings and things like that, working with some of our production team. So that's the consumer update. And I think, that's my last one. Do we have any questions or anything?
We do have some time for questions.
Hand off the mic to Chris, who's going to really be talking about extension.
Oh, I do have a question back here. Hold on one second.
On the specifics, you said in the survey you mentioned that automation had 4 levels: none, irrigation, potting, and moving plants. Did you go into specifics on that survey about what that actually meant, or was that an assumption? Did the survey takers have to assume that, or dream about what automation actually means with those?
So there are in each one of those questions about what that actually looks like and means in the operation. Yeah, because really what we've learned is that we can assume that those, themes really mean anything in reality to the takers. So we're trying in those questions to make sure that they're scenarios that have detail about what those things can actually look like. And we hope that as we begin to build on this work, that there might be, some additional videos and things like that, which may make the production practices even more.
Got time for one more question? Anyone out here or comments? So what we're looking at really is the automation takes capital investment, of course, and that's going to have to be returned. That investment is going to have to be perhaps through more plants being potted up quickly, But they could also be available for sale at the same time. It'll take 2 months and a week to plot. The workers themselves. Since their job, their life, or their might be better with automation, would the customer be willing to pay more for that plant to subsidize that worker's new satisfaction? We're willing to do it for free range chicken, but yes, they do it for free range human.
So if you look at organic industry, they're asking people to pay more for organic food, and they do a relatively decent job of asking for more money. And people are forking out for more, thinking, right? And I live in California. Before going out there, I didn't know what the farming exactly is. And farm and labor union farmers in California are doing a very good job educating people what they do. So out there, I learned what they do. They talk about automation. I don't think in nursery anybody knows because nobody talks.
Yeah, I think it is true that whether in the benefit to the eater, which was kind of the first layer of information, and then the education about the impact of the field worker, I completely agree that the food production industry has done a better job of really illuminating the realities versus the ornamental plant industry. We're working to change that. Yeah, yeah.